For the next session, we have Dr. Kameshwar Rao, Dr. Milind Paul, Dr. Kiran Gera, Dr. Pandu Naik, and Dr. Anand Bangera as the chairperson. And we have speaker as Dr. Pankaj Kundra sir and Dr. Gurudat CL. To begin with, we have Dr. Pankaj Kundra on the topic Changing Concepts in Oxygenation. Changing Concepts in Oxygenation by Dr. Pankaj Kundra.
A very good morning to all of you. I sincerely thank ISA Kerala organizers for giving me an opportunity to connect to all of you. It's really a pleasure to be connecting through this digital platform. But I sincerely hope and pray that these norms will soon end and we will be able to meet, greet, and learn from each other's like we used to do so earlier before this COVID-19 came into the picture. So the topic which I have chosen today is about concepts of oxygenation, which are important to know because all of us as anesthetists are dealing with oxygenation and one day or the other. So these concepts are important to learn, and that's primarily the reason I chose this topic. To begin with, I will start the lecture by talking about oxygen cascade. It's the journey of oxygen from alveoli to the mitochondria. And all of us have seen the picture of an oxygen cascade. And if you would look at the this oxygen cascade more critically, you will find that all these values which are given 159, 149, 100, 99, 92 are actually the values of partial pressure of oxygen tension, and it is the partial pressure gradient through which the oxygen travels down to the cells and to the mitochondria. There are various reasons why the oxygen tension falls while it comes to the tissues, and the downslope tells us the inspired oxygen tensions, how they fall, and the reasons which I have highlighted here. And then the upslope or the up ladder gives you the expired gases which go into the alveoli and therefore lead slowly to the buildup of oxygen and then washing out of other alveolar gases. So just to note, the inspired oxygen concentration or the inspired oxygen tension, which is 159, is primarily determined by two factors. So the two factors which primarily determine the PiO2 or the partial pressure of oxygen in air, let's consider here it's at sea level. So at sea level, the barometric pressure is 760 and the inspired oxygen concentration is 21%. Therefore, the partial pressure of oxygen at sea level in the atmospheric air is about 159 millimeters of mercury, which we just saw in the oxygen cascade. Now, if we go to the higher altitude, let's say towards the Mount Everest. So what are the factors which will determine the partial pressure of oxygen at the summit of the Mount Everest? It will be the FiO2 and it will be the barometric pressure. One of the two factors would remain constant, the other would change. Now, in the layman's terminology, whenever we talk or discuss about high altitude sickness, we normally tell that there is deficiency of oxygen at high altitudes. But if you look at these figures, you'll find that it is the barometric pressure which falls at high altitudes, out here at the summit of Mount Everest, but the concentration of oxygen remains constant. So this is important to remember, that the percentage concentration of gases always would remain constant. It is the barometric pressure which falls at a higher altitude, and therefore when you look at the partial pressure of oxygen and air at Mount Everest summit, it will be barely 52 millimeters of mercury. Now, if this person stays there for some time, gets acclimatized at this 8,400 meters altitude, and if you happen to take the blood gases after he has been acclimatized, you will get such a picture. Now, what does this picture tell you? If you look at this picture of a person who is alive, functional, normal at the summit of the Mount Everest, you'll find that his pH is alkalotic, but look at his PaO2s. The oxygen tension in arterial blood has fallen to almost 29.5 millimeters of mercury, and the same oxygen tension in the alveolus is about only 32.4. And there is no metabolic acidosis which you will normally see with this untenable report of blood gases had it been at sea level. So how is this that the person is alive and normal? The reason is because of a compensatory increase in hemoglobin. So when there is a compensatory increase in hemoglobin, the oxygen content is maintained, and because the oxygen content is maintained, the tissue oxygenation of this patient also is maintained. And if the tissue oxygenation, the brain oxygenation is maintained by a rise in hemoglobin concentration, life is tenable. So what we come to know now is there is something called as oxygen content, which we normally ignore and always focus our attentions towards the partial pressure of oxygen whenever we talk about tissue oxygenation. So there are two important aspects. We have already seen the importance of arterial oxygen content. Now let us also focus on the alveolar oxygen content. So what does the arterial oxygen content tell us? It told us that there has to be an increase in hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is an important determinant of oxygen content in an individual. Now, if oxygen content was so important, why are we still focused about partial pressures? What is the role of partial pressure then? Remember, the partial pressure is the one which is responsible for the transfer of oxygen from alveolus into the pulmonary capillaries. So that gradient which exists between the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveolus and the partial pressure of oxygen which exists in the pulmonary capillaries is responsible for oxygen transfer to the blood. So once the oxygen comes into the blood, then only it can combine with hemoglobin. So if the person gets acclimatized, his arterial oxygen content is almost near normal. Here it is about 18.48 as it is depicted by the equation given below. Normal oxygen content is about 20 ml. So it is almost near normal. So what has kept it under normal is the hemoglobin, which has risen to 20.2. Even if the saturation was 68% and despite the PaO2 being at 29.5. So the person is healthy, is normal, despite such low PaO2s and oxygen saturation, because the hemoglobin has compensated for the oxygen content, and that preserves the tissue oxygenation. Now let's talk about PaO2. Now I told you PaO2 is important for the oxygen to get transferred from alveoli to the pulmonary capillaries, where once it enters the blood, then it combines with the hemoglobin. So the hemoglobin, two factors would be important. What is the concentration of hemoglobin available? Here in the equation given below, it has gone to 20.2. Had the hemoglobin concentration remained at 10 or 12, this person would have been suffering from tissue oxygenation. So you need to have a critical value of hemoglobin, which will determine a normal oxygen content, which is important for tissue oxygenation. The second aspect is the saturation of the hemoglobin. Now, we must remember that normally at room air, the saturation is about 97%, which means that 97% of the hemoglobin has combined with oxygen, but 3% is still remaining. because that's the amount of oxygen which has got transferred. So if we increase the PaO2 or increase the FiO2 so that more amount of oxygen can get transferred into the blood and the whole of the hemoglobin can get saturated, that would be the best. So these saturations, concentration of hemoglobin, all of them together tell you the oxygen binding capacity of the blood. Now, having understood the arterial oxygen content, let us go to the alveolar oxygen content. The alveolar oxygen content is basically the lung oxygen reserve, like it was for the reserve in arterial blood. Similarly, in alveolus, we need to know what is the oxygen reserve or the oxygen content present in the alveoli. We have always been only talking about oxygen tensions in the alveoli. So let's relook at the alveolar gas equation. The alveolar gas equation tells you about inspired oxygen, which is dependent upon FiO2 and the barometric and water pressures. But there is another component which has been added, which is the carbon dioxide and respiratory quotient. So carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the alveolus, and the respiratory quotient is the rate at which the alveolar ventilation is taking place. So let's replace all these values and you will find that the oxygen tension in the alveolus is 100 millimeters of mercury. But we still do not know what is the oxygen content in the alveoli. Let us go a step further. Now, going a step further, we would say that the alveolar ventilation normally is about 4 liters per minute. And if it is 4 liters per minute with a person breathing at 21% of oxygen, then the alveolar concentration of oxygen per minute would be about 840 ml. Now, if the oxygen uptake is 240 ml per minute, which is constant, then the alveolar oxygen content would be about 60 ml per minute. But does it remain constant at 600 ml per minute? No. The reason is it gets diluted by the expired air which comes into the alveolus and the dead space gas which already exists in the alveoli. So when the expired air comes in, 6% of carbon dioxide is added. Therefore, the concentration of the oxygen falls from 21 to 16%. So whenever there is a rise in CO2, the tension or the percentage of oxygen will reduce, but the nitrogen concentration remains constant with the rise or fall in CO2s. So if there is an increase in FiO2, there will be increase in PO2s. But if there is an increase in PCO2, like it happens in COPDs, there will be a fall in the tensions of oxygen in the alveoli. So this we need to remember. Now let's look at the alveolar gas equation a little more. The same equation, we have substituted the values and we get an oxygen tension in the alveoli of 100 millimeters of mercury with a person breathing room air. Now, if the same person was breathing 100% oxygen, the alveolar oxygen tension would be about 660 millimeters of mercury. Now, how much does this millimeter of mercury would translate into an oxygen content or ml of oxygen available in the alveoli? So to know this, the simple formula is the fraction of the oxygen in alveoli into the functional residual capacity. How much is the functional residual capacity? It is about 2100 ml. That is at the end of expiration. So normally at FRC, 100 millimeters of oxygen tension in the alveoli translate to about availability of 273 ml of oxygen, which means the oxygen tension or the oxygen concentration has dropped from 21% now to 13%. The precise reason would be because now we are considering the volume as only the FRC, not the alveolar ventilation of 4 liters, which we were talking about earlier. But the oxygen consumption remains the same. So if the oxygen consumption is 250 ml per minute, so with 273 ml of oxygen available in the alveoli, the person will sustain oxygenation till about 70 seconds. But if you are giving 100% oxygen to this person, then oxygen will replace nitrogen and it will comprise of 88% of the alveolar volume. And if it is 88% of the alveolar volume instead of 13%, then the oxygen consumption remains the same, and this person can actually survive apnea up till 7 minutes or more. The reason is, the other thing is, it should be remembered that the available oxygen reserve actually is about not 273 ml, it is less than that, it is only about 150 ml. Because there is dead space gas which is available, so it gets diluted into that, and therefore the actual oxygen reserve is about 150 ml. And if the person is breathing room air and then becomes apneic, and then the available time or safe apnea period would be about 40 seconds. Now look at this video which I'm going to show you. This video is put into a subject where we have put a cannula into the trachea, and with the mask we have been giving oxygen for 3 to 4 minutes. So we are sampling the gases from the trachea as well as from the face mask. So what happens to this person once we look at the gases which we are doing? So look at the gas analysis. So the first monitor, you will see that the FiO2 is 100% and the EtO2 or the expired oxygen is 90%. But at the tracheal level, the FiO2 is 90% and the EtO2 is 80%. So just within this much amount of space, the FiO2 has also dropped and the EtO2 has also dropped. What is the reason? Because as it goes through, as the oxygen passes through, it gets mixed with the dead space gases which are available, and therefore the inspired as well as the expired concentration of the oxygen will continue to fall as we reach the alveoli. Now you would probably understand why I meant that not 273 ml, it is only about 150 ml of oxygen would actually be available during the period of apnea. So what does this FiO2 do? It basically does denitrogenation. That means there will be only a change in nitrogen percent if you increase the oxygen concentration without a change in carbon dioxide. So if you increase the FiO2 to 40%, the CO2 will remain the same, but the nitrogen percentage will drop from 80 to 60%. If you give 100% of oxygen for a long time and some of the alveoli contain oxygen content of 100% oxygen, they will start collapsing because all the oxygen is going to be withdrawn from them. So it is nitrogen amount which is important to keep the alveoli distended. That is the reason a lot of studies now mention that the end point of FiO2 should not be 100, it should be kept, we should not exceed more than 80%. Now, if you want to understand what is this ratio of gases, you need to know about Dalton's law. Dalton's law tells you that it is the sum of the pressures of each gases if they exist on their own. The gas mixture is the sum of the pressures or the partial pressures of each gases if they were to exist on their own. That means nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, the end result P, capital P should remain constant. Therefore, when you are giving 67% of nitrous oxide with 33% of oxygen to the patient, if you look at the partial pressures of these gases, which translates to 509 and 251, the total pressure would remain at 760. Now, similarly, if you see these partial pressures in inhaled gases, alveolar gases, exhaled gases, and look at their partial pressures, all of them sum up to a total important aspects. The one factor which it tells you that the rate of diffusion of a gas would depend upon the alveolar hemoglobin distance. So if this distance, which we are looking at in this particular slide, If this distance is increased either by alveolar interstitial edema or by alveolar collection of fluid or whatever, or there are cast or consolidation or the alveolar collapse occurs, then this distance, if it increases, it is going to affect the diffusion. The second thing which it tells us is that RBC normally takes about, it traverses about 600 to 800 micromillimeters of distance of the area where diffusion can take place. So that's the diffusion area of 600 to 800 micrometers. The time taken by the RBCs to traverse this gas exchange zone is around about 750 milliseconds. Now, if there is an increase in the alveolar hemoglobin distance and there is a fall in the time taken to traverse the gas exchange zone by the RBCs, then the diffusion would come down. So look at this graph. Now in this graph, it tells us that we start with 40 millimeters of mercury of oxygen at the arterial end of the capillary. So if it takes around 250 milliseconds to 750 milliseconds, the RBCs will be fully saturated, or the oxygen tension would be achieved at 100 millimeters and would be a plateau. If this time is less, then it will not be well saturated. And if this time is more, then also there is going to be an issue. So we need to consider the cardiac output at this particular time. If there is a fall in cardiac output, and if the transit time falls below 250 milliseconds, then the oxygenation of the blood into the pulmonary capillaries may suffer. The other aspect of Fick's law is again very important. Now I'm talking this about at the tissue level. What is happening at the tissue level? The blood is going through the capillaries, the cells are there, and you look at the blood, the oxygen tension slowly falls as it transgresses into the tissues. At this particular point, the oxygen tensions are high, so it easily diffuses. So when it diffuses, when this RBC or this blood travels a little further, the oxygen tension as it crosses the tissue will decrease. So what does it imply? It implies that the intracellular PO2 or the oxygen tension into the cells which are nearer to the capillary is higher than the cells which are farther away from the capillaries or from the hemoglobin. Similarly, if you look at the mitochondrial PO2s, you will find the mitochondria which is closer to the capillaries have higher PO2s than the mitochondria which are farther away from the capillaries. This means that the diffusion across the capillaries into the tissues depends upon the gradient of the PO2 which exists. And secondly, there will be a slow diffusion if there is a long diffusion distance and there is a low pressure gradient. There will be a rapid diffusion if the distance is short and the pressure gradient is high. So as the blood will pass through the tissues, it will slowly lose its tension, and the cells which are farther away from the bloodstream are likely to have lower oxygen tensions. A similar thing happens in the alveoli. So if this distance is great, then the diffusion is likely to suffer, right? So just remember that Fick's law applies at the tissue level once the diffusion takes place of oxygen into the tissues, and even in the alveoli once the diffusion of the oxygen takes place from alveoli into the capillaries. So now what is Fick's law of diffusion? Now it becomes a little bit easier to understand. It's the rate of diffusion of the gas proportional to the difference in the partial pressures of the gas. So instead of concentrations, we can say partial pressure for the gases. And this also depends upon the diffusion constant. What is diffusion constant? It is the capillary permeability for a specified gas. So diffusion constant is proportional to the solubility of the gas in that capillary, and this inversely proportional to the square root of the molecular weight of that gas for the capillaries. So this is a diffusion constant and the partial pressure gradient, which is important. What is A? A is the alveolar surface area. Remember, I told you 600 to 800 micrometers. So that's the alveolar surface area, which again determines what is the diffusion rate. The last one is the capillary wall thickness. So the capillary wall thickness, if it is increases, the diffusion will come down. If the capillary wall thickness is normal, the diffusion will remain normal. So this is Fick's law of diffusion, which we must understand when we talk about diffusion of gases from the alveoli to the blood and from the blood to the tissues. What do we do in clinical practice? We practice something called as pre-oxygenation, and all of the books define it as denitrogenation with 100% oxygen before inducing general anesthesia. So let us divide, how do we induce the patient? Before induction, the patient is spontaneously breathing. So that's an active phase when the patient can take in oxygen, which is called as pre-oxygenation. So depending upon its minute ventilation, the patient will be able to replace its nitrogen with oxygen. But once we induce and paralyze, then do the laryngoscopy and intubate, there has to be resist. And during this apnea, we can again continue to oxygenate the patient through a parallel source through the nose, so that oxygen continues to go into the alveoli. And this apneic oxygenation, if performed, generally makes the apnea period longer and safer. So the process is now called as continuous oxygenation, and the nomenclature changes from pre-oxygenation to oxygenation. The aim is to increase the oxygen reserve and increase the safe apnea time. Now, what happens during apnea? How does this apneic oxygen actually helps the patient? Now, blue is nitrogen, white is oxygen, and gray is carbon dioxide. Now, during apnea, you find that the oxygen is removed. 250 ml is removed from the alveolus, and only 10 ml of carbon dioxide is added. That means the alveolus has lost about 250 ml of its volume. So when it loses its volume, there is a subatmospheric pressure which is created within the alveoli, and it takes away whatever gas in whatever concentration is available in the upper airways or in the trachea or in the larger airways. So the upper airway gases enter the alveoli. So now if there is an apneic mass movement which is occurring, and if it is with air, then only the air comes in. But if it is oxygen which is present in these dead space gases, then all the oxygen comes into the alveoli because of the subatmospheric pressure, and more oxygen is available for a person to continue to meet with its oxygen consumption. So that's how the apneic gas movement or apneic oxygenation will help. But you must remember that apneic oxygenation is not effective always. One of the times when it is not effective, it is that when the saturation has already fallen. So it is a prophylactic measure, not a therapeutic measure. So if the saturation has already fallen and then you start giving oxygen to the patient will not benefit from it, because the alveolar volume has already collapsed and it has already got filled up with the air which was there in the upper airways. So it doesn't help. So there is already a low oxygen concentration in the alveoli. No significant diffusion occurs because the pressure gradient doesn't exist between the alveolus and the capillaries, and there is no subatmospheric pressure which is created. The other important aspects for apneic oxygen requirements are that you will always require a higher oxygen concentrations to develop that pressure gradient. The second thing is you will require an ancillary oxygen source where a high flow of oxygen of about 15 liters or more should be given for the subatmospheric pressure when it is created for the alveoli to restore its volume. But the most important part is a patent airway. If there is a roadblock, nothing goes into the alveoli. The soft palate generally blocks, or the base of the tongue blocks. You're giving oxygen, but it is not going into the airway. So you need an airway, preferably a nasopharyngeal airway, which the patient can tolerate. And the epiglottis needs to be lifted up. Remember, it is not always the upper airway. Even the epiglottis can fall down and obstruct the entry at the laryngeal level. So only way of lifting up the epiglottis is by means of jaw thrust. So when we are giving apneic oxygenation, make sure there is an airway. Make sure you give a jaw thrust to these patients. Look at this video. This is taken an endoscopic view of the airspace without face mask ventilation under a rapid sequence induction. Now this patient is breathing spontaneously. Look at the epiglottis, how it is behaving. The epiglottis, when the patient is breathing, opens, but during expiration, it falls down almost to the posterior pharyngeal wall, which means that when the patient would be paralyzed, this epiglottis will fall down and it will completely obstruct the airway, and therefore the air will not be able to, the oxygen will not be able to enter the larynx or the trachea through the larynx into the trachea. So you need to maintain an upper jaw thrust, as well as to prevent upper airway obstruction. You need to take help of some of the airways which are present with you. Thank you very much. I thank the organizers for giving me this good opportunity to interact. And if there are any questions, I will readily take them.
Sure, sir. That was a wonderful session, Pankaj sir. So we'll be taking the discussion and the question and answer at the end of session. So we have now one more stalwart speaker, Dr. C.L. Gurudutt. He'll be talking on the topic evolution of safety features in anesthesia machine. Evolution of safety features of anesthesia machines by Dr. Gurudutt C.L.
So good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank ISI Kerala for this opportunity. And also I would like to bring greetings from JSS Hospital presently where I am working. You know, when W.T.G. Martin, father of anesthesia, demonstrated the ether anesthesia that was on October 16, 1846. So on the patient, Gilbert Abbott, and the surgeons were Warren and Bigelow. So Martin did not use any sophisticated equipment. He had a very simple ether flask. And over many years, the anesthesiologists were not using any sophisticated equipment. They could use a Schimmelbusch mask, or even they were able to provide anesthesia using their handkerchiefs. But when later, the gases, especially the oxygen and nitrous oxide in the compressed form, were introduced in the cylinder form. So there was a requirement of an anesthesia machine wherein these cylinders could be, hanged, and then a definite amount of the gases could be delivered to the patient. So this was fulfilled by Sir Henry Edmund Gaskin Boyle. So he first introduced the anesthesia machine, that was in 1970. Since then, anesthesia machine has come a long way, and presently what we are using is the anesthesia workstation. Now, basic difference between a machine and a workstation is, in anesthesia machine is purely pneumatic, whereas the workstation has got electronic and electrical equipments also. And also, there is an integrated ventilator is there, and integrated monitor is also there with the workstation. But most important difference between the machine and the workstation is the safety features. A lot of safety features are there with the anesthesia workstation, which were not there in the anesthesia machine. And basically, all these safety features, and majority of them, were included in the pneumatic component of the anesthesia workstation. So hence, it is very important for us to know what are all the safety features were evolved in the pneumatic component of the anesthesia machine to the workstation. Now, these pneumatic components were basically, and for convenience sake, has been classified into high pressure system, the intermediate pressure system, and the low pressure system. The high pressure system basically are the cylinders and the cylinder pressures for 2000 psig of oxygen and nitrous oxide 750 psig. So in the intermediate system, we have the pipeline supply that has been introduced in the modern workstations, whereas in the older machines, the pipelines were also connected to the same yokes of oxygen or nitrous oxide. So the advantage of the modern workstations are that the cylinder pressure is reduced to 45 psig, whereas the pipeline that is directly connected to the intermediate system is connected at a pressure of 50 to 60 psig. Now, what is the advantage here is, suppose I open the cylinders also and connect the machine to the pipeline. So suppose both are open now. So preferentially the machine will use the pipeline gases, because pipeline gases are quite a bit of gases will be there, whereas cylinder gases are restricted to a small quantity of gases. So pipeline gases are preferentially used with the modern workstation, whereas in the older machines, because the pipelines were also connected to the same yoke and the pipeline pressure was at 55 to 60 psig and the cylinder pressure was much high. If you happen to open both of them, so the cylinders would get exhausted first. So this is one of the safety features that has been adopted with the modern workstations. The low pressure circuit, we have just above the atmospheric pressure, just about 5 to 8 psi. Let us discuss about all the safety features in each of these high pressure, intermediate pressure and low pressure systems. Now the high pressure system, we have the cylinders, hanger yoke assembly, cylinder pressure gauges and the pressure regulators. We all know that there are a lot of safety features that have been adopted in the cylinders. So initially they were made of hand-forged steel. This hand-forged steel did not have enough of tensile strength. Now what we have is a molybdenum steel that is being used for manufacturing these cylinders. It has got a high pressure, high tensile strength. Because of that, it could be made lightweight and it also can accommodate 20% more gas when compared to the older cylinders. And we do have aluminum cylinders for MRI suits. Now, other safety features of these color coding, which was introduced in 1949, was the color coding. And color coding, you all know that both the body of the cylinders and the shoulders were color coded. So in 2010, a new international color coding has been introduced. Of course, in India, we have not yet started using this particular new international color coding. In this new international color coding is the old one and below is a new one. In this new one, all the cylinder bodies are white. Only you can know what is the particular gas that is present in that particular cylinder is by the shoulders. You can see oxygen is white and white, nitrous oxide is white body and the blue shoulder. And there is a capital N is written on the shoulders indicating that it is a new international color coding. Now, other most important safety feature that was introduced was in 1952. That was by Philip Woodbridge, that is the pin index safety system. So in this pin index safety system, holes are made on the cylinder valves just above 14.3 or 9 by 16th of an inch below the port. And these holes are numbered from 1 to 6 and they are overlapping on each other. So the 3 and 4 holes are not overlapping, and on them the overlapping is the hole number 7. That is the hole number 7. So these holes have to be aligned with the pins that are there on the yoke assembly. Then only if they both are aligned with each other, then only you can connect a particular cylinder onto a particular yoke assembly. So now we know the numbers of these pin index safety systems for each of the gas. Now it is very easy to remember. Air is 1.5 and oxygen is 2.5 and nitrous oxide is 3.5. This 5 is common and only the first hole will differ in these pin index safety systems. So the other thing is, the cylinders should never be kept in sun. So by chance, if they are kept in sun, what will happen is the gas inside gets heated up and it tries to expand. Because it cannot expand, because we know that the volume and temperature are directly proportional to each other based on Charles' law, but the tensile strength will not allow them to expand. So the pressure starts building up because the pressure and temperature are directly proportional to each other based on Gay-Lussac's law. So at a particular critical pressure, the the cylinders will burst, and if there are any person who is nearby, it can produce damage or even trauma to that particular person. So in order to prevent that, in many of the cylinders, we do have what is called as a pressure relief devices. And these pressure relief devices are present just below the conical depression. The conical depression is the one which accommodates the tip of the retaining screw of the yoke. And this pressure relief device can be of different types. It can be a pressure sensitive one, which is a ruptured disc made of copper, or most of the time, the most commonly used is a temperature sensitive one, which is called as a fusible plug. It contains a wood alloy. It is made of bismuth, lead, tin, and cadmium. So this melts at a lower temperature of 150 to 170 degrees Fahrenheit. So in Indian cylinders, even if you try to search for this pressure relief device, it is not there. In Indian cylinders, what has been done is, as the cylinder valve is screwed into the body of, or the shoulders of the cylinder, so in between the cylinder valve and inside of the cylinder, the Woods metal is incorporated. So whenever the temperature rises and it goes beyond 150 to 170 degrees, the Woods metal will melt and then gives vent to these gases. Coming to the hanger yoke assembly, one of the very important safety features that was adopted later is the Bodock seal. So the Bodock seal was introduced in 1958. Because of the Bodock seal only, you can maintain a leak-proof connection between the yoke and then the machine. So the advantage of Bodock seal is the wear and tear is minimal. It has got a long half-life, and it is made of the very hard neoprene rubber, and there is a metal ring around the neoprene rubber, which is made of aluminum. And the caution here is you should not use more than one Bodock seal because you can negate the effect of the pin index safety system. Now, coming to the hanger yoke assembly, these hanger yoke assemblies used to be on the sides of the older machines. With the modern machines, they have been pushed to the back, just below the pipeline inlets. So one more safety feature of this hanger yoke assembly is the presence of the check valve. So the check valve will make sure that the gases flow only in the one direction, that is towards the machine and not away from the machine. If they try to come out of the gases are trying to come out of the machine, that they are going to be stopped by the check valve. So that is why these check valves are going to prevent leaking of the gases and also cross filling of the empty cylinder. Suppose if there is an empty cylinder. So many times these check valves may not be functioning properly. Always never keep the hanger assembly empty. So always plug it with a yoke plug. Now in the older machines, as I was telling you, the pipelines were connected to the yokes using what was called as the yoke block. Here you can see a yoke block, and these yoke blocks also have the pin index holes on either side of the port. Now, why the holes are present on either side is again a safety feature. Even if you connect the yoke block upside down also, you cannot negate the pin index safety system. So the modern workstations, we don't require these yoke blocks because what we have is separate inlets for the pipelines are there, and at these inlets only we are going to connect the pipelines. So when we connect the pipelines at these inlets, so we have one more safety feature that is there, which is called as the diameter index safety system. So in this diameter index safety system, on the pipeline connector side, we do have nut and stem. They are having their own diameter. On the body of the inlet, we have a separate diameter. So these diameters of the nut and stem have to align with the diameter of the body. Then only you can connect that particular pipeline onto the inlet on the machine side. So in diameter index safety system, otherwise called as a DISC, the nut and then the stem both are diameter indexed. Whereas in UK based machines, what we have is the non-interchangeable screw thread connectors. So here the nuts are not diameter indexed, only the stem is diameter indexed. So that is the difference between the NIST and then this. So at the wall outlet also we have Schrader valves, or otherwise called as the quick couplers. They are color coded, and even the piping are color coded. That is again another very important safety feature. Now coming to the Borden's pressure gauge. Now, in the older machines, the Borden's pressure gauges used to be there, or pressure gauges used to be there only for the oxygen cylinders. There were no pressure gauges for nitrous oxide yolks. Now, why that was like that was, that the oxygen will remain as a gas even at room temperature, because the critical temperature of oxygen is minus 187. Whereas nitrous oxide will remain as a liquid at room temperature, because the critical temperature of nitrous oxide is 36.5 degrees centigrade. So because oxygen remains as a gas, the pressure gauges will directly tell the contents of the cylinder. Whereas the nitrous oxide being a liquid anesthetic, so liquid at room temperature, the pressure gauges will remain at showing 750 psig, which is the vapor pressure of nitrous oxide at 20 degrees centigrade. And the indicator will not fall till all the nitrous oxide liquid is evaporated. Only afterwards, the indicator will start falling. So that is the reason in older days, they did not have a separate pressure gauge for nitrous oxide. But later, separate pressure gauges were introduced for nitrous oxide as well, because this is so that once the indicator starts falling, we know that nitrous oxide is getting emptied. So we know that one more cylinder, opening of another nitrous oxide cylinder will be required. In modern workstations, we do have pressure gauges for the pipeline gases also, because in the older machines we did not have separate pressure gauges. So this is again a very important safety feature, because of the pressure gauges for the pipeline, we know what is the pressure inside the pipeline system, and once the indicator starts falling, then we know that the gas in the pipeline is getting exhausted, so that you know that you will have to open the cylinders, the rescue cylinders that are there. So coming to the pressure regulator, we know that there were no pressure regulator when Boyle introduced his machine, and these pressure regulators themselves are very important safety features, because because of the pressure regulator, we can have a constant flow of gases through the flow meters, because the gases are supplied with a constant low pressure. Because if there was no pressure regulators, every time the pressure inside the cylinders were decreasing, the flow will also decrease, and you had to adjust the flow. So that's a very important safety feature adopted later. So again, the pressure regulators will also prevent the wear and tear of needle valves, and also can prevent barotrauma to the patients. So in the older machines, we had these pressure regulators were working as the master and slave regulators. So master being oxygen, and slave regulators were nitrous oxide. So oxygen pressure entering into the lower chamber of the nitrous oxide pressure regulator would open the flow of nitrous oxide. If there is no oxygen flow and no pressure of oxygen, or decreased pressure of oxygen, would close the flow of nitrous oxide as well. So that was a safety feature that was adopted. Presently, we don't have these kind of regulators. This has been replaced by fail-safe systems that we will discuss later. In modern GE machines, we do have second stage pressure regulators also. These second stage pressure regulators will reduce the oxygen pressure to 16 psig and nitrous oxide pressure to 26 psig. This will further make the flow meter flow very accurate, also help in the Link 25 system also, that I'll be discussing slightly later. Now coming to the intermediate pressure system, we have fail-safe valves that I'll be discussing a little bit. We have oxygen failure alarms. We have second stage pressure regulators. We do have the flush valve and direct connection of the pipeline. So all these actually are the safety features that are been adapted over many years. So coming to the fail-safe valve, now we have two different kinds of fail-safe valves. In GE machines, what we have, many of the GE machines do have the oxygen failure shut-off valve. So this oxygen failure sensor shut-off valve will keep open the nitrous oxide flow as long as oxygen pressure, supply pressure is more than 20 psig. Once the oxygen supply pressure drops down to less than 25 psig, so nitrous oxide supply or the flow will be completely cut off. Whereas in case of Draeger, what we have is oxygen failure protection devices, or otherwise called as a OFPD. Here in these fail-safe valves, we have a nozzle and a piston. So as long as the pressure of oxygen is about 50 psig, so the nitrous oxide pressure, outflow pressure is also 50 psig. Once the oxygen supply pressure drops down to 25 psig, proportionately, because the nozzle starts coming down, the nitrous oxide pressure, outflow pressure also starts decreasing. Once the oxygen pressure drops down to 10 to 12 psig, nitrous oxide flow will be completely cut off. There is a slight difference between the Draeger machines and then the GE machines. Then coming to oxygen failure alarms. So in older machines, we have pneumatic alarms, either a Bowman's whistle or a Ritchie whistle. So it used to be activated once the pressure drops to less than about 30 psig. So the oxygen that was there in a separate small cylinder would activate these whistles. Whereas with the modern workstations, we don't have these pneumatic alarms. We have the electronic alarms. These in Omeda, it starts at 28 psig, and in Draeger, it may start around 30 to 37 psig. The advantages of these electronic alarms is that they don't stop till the pressure of oxygen is restored. It will continue to give the alarms. Now coming to the oxygen flush valve. So this is again a safety feature which has been adopted later than the original Boyle's machine. So here you should always realize that these flush valves are directly connected to either to the pipeline or to the pressure regulators. And once you activate, the amount of flow will be nearly about 35 to 70 liters of flow with a pressure of almost about 45 to 55 psig. So one thing you should realize that they bypass the flow meters and the vaporizers. So because of that, if you activate it, there can be dilution of an acetate, and the other problem is there is a chance of hazard of barotrauma because such a high pressure and high flow of gas is going to the patient. This usually you can activate. The safety feature is you can activate whenever you are having a difficulty in the mask ventilation. Mask is not properly fit, a lot of leak. So when you give such a high flows, it will overcome the leak. So this barotrauma problem can be overcome. In case of Draeger machines, we have what is called as fresh gas flow decoupling valve. So this decoupling valve, the inspired gases, the fresh gases will directly go to the reservoir bag, and the fresh gases will not go to the patient during inspiration. Only these during expiration, the fresh gas decoupling valve will open, and into the piston, it draws the gases from the reservoir bag and also the fresh gases. So that's how it is going to prevent the barotrauma even if you are activating the flush valve. Coming to the low pressure circuit, we do have the flow meter assemblies, vaporizers, check valves, and the common gas outlet. So coming to the flow meter assembly, so in the older machines, each gas had only one flow meter. So with the modern flow meter assemblies, we do have two flow meters for each gas. So the first flow meter, they are arranged in series. The first flow meter is for low flows so that you can have an accurate flow for low flows. The second flow meter is for high flows. So coming to the flow control valves, these are touch coded and color coded. That's a very important safety feature. Even just touching, which flow control knob you are touching. Coming to the pressure proportionating devices, these proportionating devices are present in between the flow control knobs and then the flow control valves. The different kinds of proportionating devices are there in GE machines and in Draeger machines. In GE machines, what we have is called as Link 25. So this Link 25 is purely a mechanical one. We do have sprockets or gears for oxygen and nitrous oxide separately. These sprockets have 28 teeth for oxygen and 14 teeth for nitrous oxide. These sprockets are connected by a chain. So the chain will not link these two or will not get engaged till the oxygen flow comes down to 25% of the total. Only then the link gets engaged, and any rotation of nitrous oxide, two rotations of nitrous oxide will rotate the oxygen once. So, and the pressure difference is also there because the second stage pressure regulators, because of that, the minimal flow of oxygen is always maintained at 25%. And if anything more than 25% of oxygen is flowing towards the patient, so the link gets disengaged. Since the link gets engaged only when it comes down to 25%, it is called as the link 25. Whereas in case of Draeger, we have pneumatic type of the proportionating devices. We have oxygen ratio monitor control. Presently, it is called as sensitive oxygen ratio monitor control. The mechanism is same. Both the flow meters are connected to two chambers, oxygen chamber and nitrous oxide chamber, which are connected by a diaphragm and a shaft. Whenever we open up oxygen, the shaft pushes the nitrous oxide towards the nitrous oxide, and the flow of nitrous oxide can start. So if you try to increase the nitrous oxide, so then what will happen is the shaft is shifted towards the oxygen, and it will automatically decrease the amount of nitrous oxide flow, or even it can completely stop the nitrous oxide flow. So that is what is called as oxygen ratio monitor control, which is purely pneumatic. Now coming to the flow meters assembly, there is in the older ones we had the fluorescent backing. Even many of the modern workstations we have fluorescent backing and a fluorescent dot over the bobbin, so that even when you are working in darker areas like radiology suits, you'll be able to see that the amount of flow and also the bobbin is rotating. So with modern workstations, we do have lights for the flow meter assembly, so that in dark area environments, you can easily see the amount of flow. An anti-static spray called as Croxtin has been sprayed inside the flow meters to prevent bobbin sticking onto the inner sides of the flow meters. That is again a safety feature. Coming to the sequence of these flow meters, so what is very important in modern workstations, we have oxygen to the complete downstream when compared to all the other flow meters. This is basically if there is any leak in any of the flow meters like air or nitrous oxide, the oxygen should not leak out. The oxygen should always be delivered to the patient, and we can prevent definitely the hypoxic mixture delivered to the patient. Now, many of the modern workstations do have electronic flow meters, which are very, very accurate. You can also have a virtual flow meter in which you know what is the total flow that is going to the patient. Now coming to the trilene lock and Boyle's bottles in the backbore or manifold, that is vaporizer manifold. In older machines, we had these Boyle's bottles. They were not concentration calibrated and also not temperature compensated. There was a trilene lock which used to be there with the older machines. You know, the trilene reacts with the soda lime and can produce a neurotoxic agent that is called as a phosgene. So with the modern workstations, in older machines itself, so because of preventing the production of this phosgene, if you are using trilene, so the trilene lock will see that you will not be able to open up the closed circuit. Or if you are using closed circuit, you will not be able to open up the trilene vaporizer. So with the modern workstations, the vaporizers do have key indexed safety system for filling them, so you can prevent wrong agent being filled in those vaporizers. And also we have the selecting only one vaporizer at a time. You cannot open two vaporizers because of the devices like Selectatec, which is there in GE machines. So again, we do have check valves and pop-off valves, which was incorporated later in the Boyle's machine as well. So these check valves will prevent any back pressure effect onto the vaporizers. We do have check valves in GE, many of the GE machines, even in the modern workstations. The pop-up valves are also there. This pop-up valve will open up when the back pressure is more than 300 centimeters of water. So now, if you have one thing you should always realize that there are no safety features between the flow meter assembly and the common gas outlet. Because there are no safety features in between, any leaks can produce hypoxic mixture being delivered to the patient. So in order to prevent that, you have to go for a leak test. Ideal would be to go for a negative pressure leak test, which is called as a universal leak test. And whenever you want to do a leak test, you should always open the vaporizers and also do the leak test or repeat the leak test, so that you know that most of the time it is at this level only there can be leaks. So whatever it may be, that since we don't have any safety features between the flow control valves and the common gas outlet, it is always in the modern workstations, we do have oxygen sensors. They are placed in the inspiratory limb of the closed circuit. So with these oxygen sensors, we definitely will be knowing what is the FiO2 that is being delivered to the patient. So that way, definitely we know that if there is any hypoxic mixture being delivered to the patient, will always be forewarned. So to conclude, over the years, conventional anesthesia machine has evolved into an advanced workstation. The new machines use advanced electronics, software, and technology to offer extensive capabilities for ventilation, monitoring, inhaled agent delivery, low flow anesthesia, and even closed loop anesthesias. New solutions to old problems might rise. New problems, we must remain educated, prepared, and vigilant. An oxygen analyzer and a vigilant anesthetist are the minimum mandatory requirements for providing safe anesthesia. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Pankaj Kundra sir and Gurudat sir, for that quite elaborative session. Now we'll be moving on for the panel discussion. So we have with us Dr. Anand Bangera and Dr. Kameshwar sir. And Dr.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Gurudat sir, just unmute, sir.
Okay, right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, Pankaj Kundra sir, please unmute. Yes, sir. The platform is for discussion now, and we have about 5 minutes. 5 minutes for discussion.
Sir, first of all, I congratulate and appreciate ISA Kerala branch for conducting this webinar, which is a state webinar incorporating many postgraduates as delegates and presenting papers and posters, and very good lectures by eminent speakers. And all the topics I'm hearing since morning, very excellent topics and excellent speakers. And Dr. Pankaj Kundra sir, one point I wish to get clarification regarding in COVID time, there is happy hypoxia. How can you explain based on this oxygen transport mechanism and all these things?
So the happy hypoxia, basically, if you look at the literature, it very clearly mentions that normally there is acute thrombosis kind of a clinical situation which exists. And because of that thrombosis, microthrombi which are lodged into the pulmonary capillaries, there is a VQ mismatch. And because of this VQ mismatch, the saturations do fall down. But generally, the patients do not complain of any sort of breathlessness, and they generally accept that much of amount of oxygen which is available. Their PO2s may be low, around about 90 or so, but there is no respiratory distress which is associated. It is basically because of microthrombi which exist in the pulmonary capillaries.
It's resulting in some pulmonary vasodilatation, it seems.
Yes, yes, sir.
Only for some of the postgraduates are having this doubt. That's
Yes.
Sir, there was one question. What are the safety features on compressed air attached to anesthesia machine? to Gurudat sir.
Okay, compressed air, there are hardly any safety features attached to that, except the pipeline attachment. Again, you have a diameter safety index is always there, and because it already contains 21% of oxygen, there is no fail-safe valve for air. That is always there. There are hardly anything for air.
Gurudat sir, one question regarding safety features which I always have is, in India, do we really follow all these safety standards like ASTM or ANSI, whatever it is? Because the cost is the main factor as far as anesthesia workstation is concerned. So there are a lot of machines which are available, which are relatively cheaper. And I have always a doubt that all these standards are not followed. Or is it really strictly followed? Because I have a proof for this, because once I wanted to connect the oxygen cylinder to this one, but I could not connect at all. I was really surprised, and when I looked into it very keenly, what was actually happened is they had connected a nitrous oxide cylinder valve into a oxygen body. Because all these things can happen in a country like our country. So I just wanted to know whether these features or the testing standards are really strictly followed in India or not.
No, that is very unfortunate that that particular machine which you are telling that such a thing I have not come across. Anyway, if we go for standard workstations, I don't think any problem is there, and they all will have the standard safety features. That is always
there are machines available not from standard companies, sir, because there's many of the nursing homes, they go for they buy these machines which are not very costly, because many times when they buy, they don't take opinion from anesthesiologists, nursing home owners. They buy themselves because it is relatively cheaper, because it is one of the practical aspect. That is why I need this question.
That I think the ISA has to look into this particular problem. If such a problem exists, definitely that such companies, should be, barred from selling the anesthesia workstations. Definitely, because otherwise we do develop a lot of patient problems. Patient safety will be, affected.
Yes, ISA should take up this.
Yeah, naturally.
Yes.
That is actually a good point, sir. Companies are supplying from 4 lakhs to 30 lakhs. Different rates are available for these workstations. So compromisation of the safety mechanism is there. That is the doubt I also have about these low-cost machines. Gurudat sir?
Pardon, sir? Yes, that is always there, sir. So it is always better we check everything, the hypoxic guard before starting the anesthesia, and also, as you said, that the cylinders and all those things. Finally, what is very important is the man behind the machine. It is not the machine at all. So,
Correct.
because as sir, you are also there since a long time, you are practicing anesthesia. We are practicing with the basic anesthesia machines. So we never had any problems. To tell you frankly, when I went to Ballari, I was called in for practice outside. There were no anesthesia machines. They had one Rao's ether resuscitator.
Oh.
It had one bellows and Boyle's bottle, and you had to ventilate the patient with room air. So I had to manage with such preliminary equipments. So naturally,
Sir, we all did like that,
machine.
sir. We all did like that in our earlier days with EMO, bellows and all this.
Oxford bellows, yes, sir.
Oxford bellows.
Sir, sorry for the interruption. With the interest of time, we have to wind up this session. Is that okay? So there are no more questions in the chat box so far.
Okay.
Thank you, chairpersons, Dr. Anand Bangera sir, Annajay Kameshwar sir, Milan Paul, and for the speaker Gurudat sir and Pankaj sir. Thanks a lot. So we'll be heading to the next session. Thank you.